So I have a YouTube channel where I usually review decks, but I also just kind of talk about books, and I've lately started to reach out to people to talk about their tarot decks. And I think it's just fascinating how everybody has sort of a different take. And they bring so much to the tarot community in their own way. So I just thought, I'd talk and get your opinion and your thoughts. So you created the Guardian Tarot,
Yes.
which is it's hauntingly beautiful. It really is. So can you tell me a little bit about it and what started you on the journey to create it?
Okay, so a little bit about the deck retrospect. Um, it all went way far back to when my son was 4 years old, and we lived in Cherryfield, Maine, and we were walking home. It was early spring, and the leaves had all started coming out on all these different trees, and he was walking along admiring them. Well, there's this one tree in the middle of a field, a birch tree, and it had this orange yellow fungus growing on it, and it was left completely stark bare, no leaves on it at all. And he said, "Well, Mom, what happened? What happened?" Very concerned that, there's a dead tree and he's 4 years old. And I said, "Well, chances are possibly pollution." And because at the same time that this conversation happened, uh, President, the former President Bush had repealed a law that took the filters off of the caps of the mills and the uh, industries that were releasing toxins into the atmosphere. And they prior to that, Bill Clinton had put on a law that they had to filter out the mercury. Well, they had taken off the filters, and suddenly, living in Maine, I couldn't now eat the fish due to the mercury poisoning and the pollution levels.
Oh,
And I'm watching and seeing, plants dying around me. And I'm watching this over the course of my lifetime. So without even thinking, I said, pollution. Well, what ended up transpiring is that from that one sentence, pollution, and then I pointed over to the smokestacks so my son could make the connection that the smokestacks were contributing to the pollution and our effect upon the environment. From that point on, for the next year or so, every time he would see a smokestack emitting smoke, he would point to it and scream, pollution! That, we were killing the trees, we were killing where we lived. And even at 4 years old, he knew this. So inherently, it infuriated me that the by repealing this law to help make our environment better, that I had to explain this to my son, that we are the cause of our environment. And as I stood there looking out, in about a month or so after the fact, and the trees were still just starting to get their leaves, so they weren't really overly decorated at that point. And I'm watching it as the leaves, and not the leaves, I'm sorry, the branches were reaching up towards the moon as it was coming up in between the branches. And I was just filled with like rage, angered at, here I am, I'm a part of this society, and yet what's the betterment for our society and how we treat nature and our role within this, and it just felt like the environment around me was screaming. And so the initial trees were very much like what you see on the tower card and the death card,
Mhm.
where they're black and white, they're devoid of color. There is like a frantic um, ethereal scream that happens within it. And just the terror of realizing, we are polluting and we are decimating our own environment. And this deck came about after years of painting the trees. They started off very gruesome, even more gruesome than, no, I shouldn't say gruesome, but they were just really angry eye sockets, emancipated, just bones. And as I moved through this, and I started to reframe my thinking and rethinking that, okay, so instead of being anti, I need to be pro taking responsibility for my impact on my environment. And that's about the time the carbon footprinting was coming out and getting back into recycling, and even more so. And from that point, the trees had started shifting into being very much more goddess like in getting connected to our environment through divine connection, that we're all connected.
Mhm.
It's not just a them or an us, or to be angry about it, that it just is. And so I had to reframe myself. Then as this deck came along, it's really, it's like as I was connecting to this energy, I kept seeing these images coming into my head, and I had to draw them out as fast as I could. And it was almost like a frantic painting where one image was right on top of the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. And it was like I would go to work, I would come home, and I would be painting until midnight, 1, 2 in the morning. Over the weekend, that's all I ever did, was just work on this one deck and the words. It was just very much channeling this type of energy. And at the end result is exactly what you see, this deck that really calls to people to connect to and understand that everything that we live within our environment, it's all connected. And how we treat ourselves, our health in our emotional relationships, to those, to even the health of, taking care of, recycling, getting that vehicle that has less carbon emission. Eventually, if we all did this together, we would all be much further along. And repeatedly, that's what I've heard from people, is that this deck really, on emotional level, makes them stop and rethink and reframe what they need to do in their life, instead of saying, oh, well, I need this to happen, this to happen, this to happen. Well, what do we need to take care of in here first before anything can get changed? Because once we take care of ourselves and we nurture ourselves, everything else just falls into place.
So, do you feel that the deck sort of is connecting nature and spirit in a way that you can kind of work with it on a one-on-one through the vehicle of the tarot?
Yes, it's very true, and that's the feedback I've gotten from people that have started working with the Guardian Tarot. In particular, out of all the decks that I've made, it's the Guardian Tarot that people have written back on in regards to when they've started working with them, that they now are stopping to relook and reframe their own thinking, that they have developed a better sense as to who they are and what their next steps of how to improve and become their higher self and their best self in this world. Because once we move towards that, then we can start addressing other things around us and really affecting change by example, really.
The deck for me, it feels like it has a lot of feminine energy with the cards, just the depictions, and also of children, of the
Yeah.
offspring. And it really comes through in the cards, that just the delicate lines and the shading. You primarily work in watercolor. And,
Yes. And originally, when I started college, my
mhm.
painting instructor was Greg Harrison and Henderson. I'm sorry, Greg Henderson. And he was a watercolor illustrator. And he introduced me to William Blake, Kate Greenlaw, and really pushed me in the boundaries of applying color. And then as I was progressing through my college years and professionally, the other artists, you asked about other artists that
Mhm.
inspires my
Yes.
stylization. Georgia O'Keeffe,
Mhm.
an artist by the name of Alberto Giacometti, whom I
Yes.
and
Love
yes, the long
Giacometti.
elongated legs and the
Yes.
big trunks. And I did an intensive research project on Alberto Giacometti in college, and he was a bit of a chauvinist.
Yeah.
And so with the women and having their arms always, at the body or down straight or across their chest. And I found that when I had my tree forms and suddenly I was breaking those arms out in a way, it was, for me, in my mind, I was breaking away from his standard or his expectations or that block that he had. I don't know why I went right for him, but it was, I just wanted to give a little nudge back at one of the masters.
Yes.
And so those are the
These
ones that have inspired.
Yeah, Giacometti. I've one of my favorite sculptures of his is the hands holding a void, where it's
Hmm.
this praying mantis look like head, but it's this trapped figure, feminine figure because of the breasts, and the hands are just like kind of frozen. And his sculpture, woman with her throat cut, which is at the the one in France, the Centre Pompidou. It's there, and it's yeah, you can tell you even his was it some of his other sculpture. Yeah, a lot of surrealists they were sort of misogynistic and chauvinistic because sex and death was a big thing with surrealism, and not too many women broke out of that. There's Merritt Oppenheim and uh, Leonora Carrington. Not too many people don't really know too many female surrealists that were really recognized. But the elongated figures later on, Giacometti built up these elongated figures, and I can definitely see that in the trees. Trees are long, and there's a quote in a from there's a park that's near me, and it says, "Today I've grown taller by walking with the trees," and that can be applied in many ways, respecting nature, uh, becoming more at peace, breathing in the fresh air, um, relieving stress by exercising. There's a lot of connection I think with trees, and I think trees are overlooked a lot as far as living creatures because they are there. They don't move much. The limbs move, but they're so important to the environment as far as pulling in the carbon dioxide and releasing the oxygen and just beautifying spaces. Our own mental state. You see a beautiful tree, you see leaves changing color, you see lovely flowers. It does brighten your spirit. It makes you feel better being in nature. And you can one of the things I wanted to ask about was most of the trees, the majority of them, are lacking foliage in the deck.
Hmm.
Um, can can you why are most of the cards lacking foliage? I guess that's my big question.
Um, for me, I grew up in Maine,
Hmm.
and at the time period when this was being made, it was through the winter time.
Mm.
And so as I'm out with the trees and looking around, it's these gnarled, essence of reality what, because, all right, this is gonna, well, no, this is the truth. I find a lot of times with people in general, I got my nice shirt on, I got my nice little necklace, my hair's tied back. I have foliage, okay? I have a distractor
Hmm.
from the reality, the bones of my existence. And by getting back down to the very essence of the existence, the reality of what is at the very core of it, and the core of who we are, at the core of everything, is we need to look at the very structure. So that can also be related into the very structure of our society. How do we treat things at the very essence when they don't have those nice coverings
Mm.
that we come to admire, that, oh, it's nice and green, oh, it's healthy, oh, it's fine. Take that away. Look at the reality. Stop disguising everything. And that's hard. That's very hard when we take away like all our filters and things that we use for covering. It's sometimes we don't like what we see in ourselves, but we have to if we're going to improve the world around us.
I agree with that. That's really interesting. Um, what's your favorite card in the deck?
My
Or
favorite card.
yeah.
Okay. Funny enough, I have a lot,
Mhm.
but funny enough, it's actually the cover of this, and Schiffer Publishing didn't know it, but they put my
Oh,
favorite one on here. Yep,
okay. Yeah.
exactly. And do you want me to tell you what it is?
Sure. Yes.
Okay. So at the time when I was making this, my oldest one was closing in on graduating, and I was coming to a lot of new realities about myself. Like, did I really want to stay in this one particular area? my other kids were going to be all graduated. Now, this past year, my youngest just graduated, and they've always seen me as being the stable rock, the one with the stable one, the one that's always there, always grounded. And I was mentally getting ready that to let them go. And that transition of life, of having to let go of people around you that you have always been there
Hmm.
for me, it's like, am I really ready for this? At the time, absolutely not. And so it was something that I had to face, that even within the artwork as I was making it, these were things that were at the back of my mind also on. As like, well, I know I'm going through it. I know others are going to go through it. And so the three birds are my three kids.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And yeah, and funny enough, due to COVID, two of them are still living with me. So I'm happy as a lark right now. So
That's
it works.
that's great. Um, One of the cards you substituted instead of strength, you went for suspend in this card. Um,
Yeah.
so, what was the story behind sort of the shift?
The shift for that one is that there are like, okay, so remember how I just was on about, knowing that the shift was going to have to happen to me as a parent,
Hmm.
and reflecting, and that whole, and as you notice, the leaves are falling away, the reality of facing that I'm getting older,
Hmm.
I'm changing, my foliage is shifting color, people see me in a certain light, people see other people in a certain light. And as we're going through our life changes, it shifts. We change. How people knew us before drops away. And by having the tree over the scrying mirror and the leaves falling away, I wanted to bring attention that, to be reflective, to, yeah, recognize you are changing and you can't stop it. So, in that moment right there, you need to pull on your own inner strength to move yourself through that moment and just breathe it as well. Because there are times when the strength of the moment is by pulling yourself together and recognizing the truth before you move out of that moment. And instead of just charging in like, aha, I got this. No. Sometimes you just need to pull back and say, yes, this is my reality. I am changing and there is still strength in it. I admire what I had in the past, and I'm going to move forward when you're ready, and not to push.
Wow, that's actually kind of deep. The whole that whole card, it has a new meaning. I didn't even connect the like a scrying um, mirror underneath the tree, but I see the tree bending and looking and the leaves falling, and that makes complete sense with what you just said. So thanks for saying that. That really, the card takes on a whole new meaning for me um, in working with it. Um, you've created some other decks. You have a few oracle decks that you've done, and you've done. You're an accomplished artist. You've done quite a bit of art. What are some of the other decks you've done?
I I'm responsible for the mass production of Dream Raven Tarot. Tarot Leaves was my first one,
Mhm.
and also the Blue Cat Tarot, which is a very fun, whimsical, lighthearted
Mhm.
art tarot through the perspective of a Siamese cat, and it's modeled after my former cat. She was a Siamese. Her name was
Oh,
Isis, and literally some of the body language was her antics and her response to different things in life, and I just couldn't help myself.
hmm.
uh, some of the I have a new deck coming out in
Mhm.
2021. It's called Ravenous Dragon Tarot,
Hmm.
and that is a continuation, not quite a continuation, but another step level where the Guardian Tarot is more about the intrinsic journey, and the Ravenous Dragon one is when you take that intrinsic and then you add in a mentor and other people that come into play as they're leading their lives, but they're also there to help you mentor yours into being your better self, and to recognize those people as they are in your life, and to recognize they have their life too. And so it becomes like a counterbalance
Okay.
between mentoring each other and also to appreciate and cherish those people that are have that role within your life. And so that's a new one coming out. To date, I'm around 100 different decks, most of which are limited editions.
Mhm.
And I recently started posting some on Game Crafter, like some of my offbeat funny one. I have one called Isabel Snail, and then Kirk, the Kilted Rubber Chicken.
Hmm.
And those two decks are much more politically charged, where Kirk finds himself basically stuck at home in COVID. I started sketching him out just as we were going into lockdown and capturing, you know, the emotion through a very comedic manner of how, you know, how are we going to work through this? And for me, I work through it with a little touch of humor.
Hmm.
And Isabel Snail came about as we were finding out about the children being lost by our government,
Hmm.
and the children also being locked up, and my feelings as a mom. And I'm in my real life, I'm an art educator for 20 years. So I've been a proponent for kids all my life. And so you can imagine having that news coming out, and here I am teaching, and I'm like, no, we can't possibly. And so my one of my cartoon character, Isabel Snail, came about, and in some of the cards, I have the different symbols that record the time period that's going on at the moment. So there are some decks that are very autobiographical, some that are just capturing the general feel of the nation a lot of times, and some of them are truly very personal, very like in-depth exploration of where I was in that time period. And that's what I have found with tarot decks, is that I have yet to be bored of them.
Mm.
And I've I've done bird paintings, landscapes, lighthouses, portraits, abstract, but I always get bored of it because it seems so repetitive.
Mm.
But within tarot, there are so many nuances, so many points of view. And when I start asking, well, if I was this character, what would my reaction be to this? So I frame my mindset in the trees, in a cat, in a little gesture doll, little Nestor doll, you know, like the little Russian dolls, and or like a swan. I think I had one with swans in it once, and snowmen. And I just asked myself, what would be a tower moment for a snowman? Oh, the sun coming out melting would be pretty much a tower moment. you know, and and I put these, in an earlier Isabel Snail deck, and it was modeled after my oldest daughter who loved golfing, and so it's like, what would be an absolute tower moment for a snail who likes to hang out at the golf course? Being on top of the tee with the 9-iron coming down.
Mm.
That would be a tower moment. And those little quirky, little touch of dark humor is where I really like to reside because it's fun,
Mm-hmm.
just kind of like a little poke. But it's the decks like the Guardian Tarot, the Dream Raven Tarot, and the Ravenous Dragon is where I really start dropping into how do we achieve to move ourselves ahead to be our best version for the people around us and for ourselves ultimately.
One of the things that that my personal philosophy is, if you can't laugh, you're either going to cry. You might cry. So sometimes you have to inject humor in life, deal with things. And it's like it's a healthy way of dealing with life and current situations, and how the world is, because it can be very depressing. And so it might be a mask, but sometimes humor is the best way we get through things, and sharing humor with others. And it's great that you take kind of very personal decks and share them with other people, because they could find the same thing that you found in creating them, in using them. So I think that that's really awesome. Um, do you so as a tarot, do you read tarot much? I guess.
Here and there, if I have like, there's one place on the world where I absolutely, if I am there, I will read cards for anyone. And of all the places, it's Durango, Colorado.
Hmm.
And I went, I had gone down to the metaphysical fair that's held in early September, like the second week of September. And what ended up happening is people were walking around to all the tarot readers, and I started noticing, some people coming back and they're like, "Do you read cards?" It's like, usually I don't because I designed them. I don't want to take business away from the readers.
Hmm.
And this one lady came back, she says, "Nope, I can't have anybody else read my cards but you." And so when I'm asked,
Mm-hmm.
and then after a few years, I started opening up a booth, and I had to be very wary about that because I just read the cards as they come out, and I start off with just telling you what the card is about. And then as each card comes along and I'm explaining how it fits, and then all of a sudden this whole story emerges. And time after time, people were crying
Hmm.
and just this huge emotional release. And I wasn't ready for it. I didn't realize that what was going to happen. And so I remember the first time this happened, I looked at my kids who were watching the front of my booth to sell my decks, and they, uh, I had to get them to run to the bathroom to go get tissues for me because people were just full out releasing
Hmm.
all these emotions. And it was working with the decks like the Guardian Tarot and the Dream Ravens. And I warn people, these cut to the heart of your soul. And when I first introduced Dream Ravens to, they've changed their name, Isis Metaphysical Books in Denver. I remember hearing a woman at the back of the room, "I'm going to need a psychologist after this." I'm going, what? And I was like, oh my gosh, the way I phrased my questions at the back of the book and the type of readings that I developed that are specific to the deck,
Mm-hmm.
they really, it doesn't matter what deck you pull. From what I was noticing, people were really getting readings that were really honing in on what they really needed to know in order to move ahead, and what did they have to address in their personal lives, instead of worrying about, will I get the job? Well, what do you need to learn first, or what do you need to do first before you're ready for the job? And that's kind of where I'm at. It's like, all right, so you want things to change, but what are you going to do to change to get it?
Yeah. Hmm. Are there any decks that you've not created that you've worked with that you enjoy working with?
Uh, let's see, the deck that I enjoy working with that's not mine. There is one called the White Witch. It's
Hmm.
just a 22. It's 22, 24. Yeah, it's the majors only deck, and the artist is they're just like little blacks, almost square like,
Mm-hmm.
and the renderings are in like this gold line work that when you look at it, you see one thing, and then as you're dropping into it, there's something else that emerges, and it just in the line work and how it's created, it just blows me away every time. And it's a deck that you just want to take, sit down with a cup of coffee, pull a card, reflect on it, maybe have a secondary deck along with it to kind of get an expanded conversation going on with it. But out of all the decks that I've seen come out in recent time, it's it is one that just draws me right in due to the illustration and the allowing the viewer to come to reach in and hit upon their subconscious. Instead of being told what it is about, it allows you to explore and to bring to light into consciousness, what do you need to know within this card and your question, your perspective. And that I really appreciate.
Very cool. Okay, so I guess this is in wrapping up. Um, if you were stuck in an elevator with someone and you saw that they had just bought the Guardian Tarot, what would you say if you said, "Oh, I created it, that's mine." What would you tell them right off the bat?
I would first see if they had it open,
Okay.
if they'd opened it yet. Uh, and then I'd ask them, would you like me to sign it since I'm right here? Uh, and yeah, ask them if they've opened it first. And I would also ask them, how have the cards responded to you? Because some people that come by and they touch the Guardian Tarot, they get an electric shock that goes up their arms. Some people, they can't go near them. And so the deck really seems to choose who it goes to. And I find that very unique. I've only ever seen that happen with one of my other decks where the lady came by to my table and told me, she's like, I can't touch this particular deck. It was called Darkened Dreams. And she's like, she couldn't even put her hand even 6 inches away from it, and just the energy from it, she couldn't go near it.
Mm.
And just to see how do the cards react to them, what type of readings are they getting, how are they connecting to the deck, because that I feel is much more important to me to have that feedback, so that I know as I move forward, how can that whole becoming to your best version of yourself, and that's also pushing me to become the best version of a tarot artist that I can be by having that information.
Awesome. Well, I think that's all the questions. I really appreciate you taking time out to talk with me about the deck, because I did a review of it a couple months ago without really using it. I bought it and I went through it and did a flip through like most reviewers do. And I was trained in watercolor in college. It was like one of my minors, and I appreciate good watercolor. So that's kind of what drew me to the deck. But then also the tree aspect, because I'm a gardener, that really made me want to um, go after and look at the deck closer, because you can't experience the deck unless virtually. You need to get it in your hands and actually touch and work with it. But it's such a cool and awesome deck. So it really was a treat to talk to you about it and find out more information and just the whole process. I really
Thank
appreciate
you very much. Appreciate it.
it.
And
Yeah.
it's been really fun. It's always good to get to have these types of questions,
Mhm.
because when I'm in the moment and just creating one to the next to the next to the next, and then to be having to stop and say, well, where were you at this space and
Mhm.
time? And then to go back and remember sitting there with the color and pulling that bead of color down across it. And did I transition it? Why did I transition it? What was the color meaning behind it? Because every color, everything that's on there, it's all important.
Mhm.
So if you are into the color fields, there's certain colors in there to trigger that type of reading. The honest look, the straightforwardness, the one with the bars that go across
Mhm.
in the various values, that there's no accidents on those colors at all. And to have the questions back, I appreciate it greatly.
Cool.
It makes me stop and go, wow, yeah.
Well, thank you so much. This week I'll probably work on the video and I'll send you the link to it so you can check it out.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Sure. Well,
All
you
right.
have a good
And
night.
pardon
Bye.
me.
You can have a good night.
Oh, you too.
Bye bye.
Bye.